Princess Catherine sat at the long mahogany table, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her crystal water glass. The grand dining hall of Buckingham Palace stretched before her like an endless sea of polished silver and pristine white china. 14 chairs surrounded the table, but tonight only 6 were occupied. The silence was deafening, broken only by the soft clinking of cutlery against fine porcelain. She had been married to Prince William for 3 years now, but the royal dining rituals still felt foreign and intimidating. Every movement, every gesture, every breath seemed to carry hidden meanings that she was still learning to decode. Her mother-in-law, Queen Elizabeth, sat at the head of the table with the poise of someone who had mastered these silent conversations decades ago. Catherine watched as the Queen delicately placed her fork at a precise angle on her plate. Within seconds, 3 uniformed staff members appeared from the shadows, moving like ghosts through the room. They cleared the soup course with such efficiency that Catherine barely noticed the bowls disappearing. This was her first lesson in the royal dining signals. When the monarch finished eating, everyone finished eating, regardless of how much food remained on their plates. Prince Charles sat to the Queen's right, his weathered hands moving with practiced precision. Catherine noticed how he never quite finished his wine, always leaving a small amount in the glass. She had asked William about this once, and he had explained that finishing one's drink completely was considered improper at formal dinners. It suggested either greed or a lack of self-control, neither of which was acceptable for a member of the royal family. William squeezed Catherine's hand gently under the table, a gesture invisible to the others, but deeply comforting to her. His touch reminded her that beneath all the ceremony and tradition, they were still just a married couple trying to navigate this complex world together. She had learned that physical affection during formal dinners was strictly forbidden above the table, but small gestures of support could be shared in secret. The main course arrived with the same silent precision as the soup had departed. Roasted lamb with rosemary, prepared by a chef whose reputation extended far beyond the palace walls. Catherine had learned to eat slowly, taking small bites and pausing frequently. Royal meals were not about satisfying hunger. They were about demonstrating refinement, control, and proper breeding. Princess sat across from Catherine, her sharp eyes constantly observing and evaluating, and had been born into this world and moved through the dining rituals with natural grace. She never seemed to struggle with which fork to use or when to speak. Catherine envied that confidence, that inherited understanding of a world she was still trying to master. The conversation during dinner followed strict protocols. Personal matters were never discussed. Current events were addressed only in the most general terms. The weather was always a safe topic, as were charitable endeavors and upcoming official engagements. Catherine had made the mistake early in her marriage of mentioning a friend's pregnancy during dinner. The disapproving silence that followed taught her more about royal etiquette than any handbook ever could. She watched Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, as he methodically cut his lamb into precise, uniform pieces. His movements were economical, efficient, and purposeful. There was no wasted motion, no unnecessary flourish. Even in his advanced age, he embodied the dignity and restraint that the royal family valued above all else. Catherine had learned that the way one held their cutlery could communicate volumes. Fork in the left hand, knife in the right, never switching between hands as Americans often did. The handle should rest in the palms, not be gripped like pencils. When pausing between bites, the utensil should be placed at 4 and 8 o'clock on the plate, never crossed or laid carelessly aside. The Queen reached for her water glass again, and Catherine noticed how she used only her thumb and first 2 fingers, never allowing her entire hand to wrap around the stem. These small details, seemingly insignificant to an outsider, were the building blocks of royal behavior. Each gesture was refined through generations of practice and tradition. Young Prince Harry, barely 18 and still learning the ropes himself, occasionally caught Catherine's eye across the table. His mischievous smile reminded her that even in this formal setting, humanity could peek through the ceremonial facade. Harry had a gift for finding moments of lightness in even the most solemn occasions, though he was careful never to cross the line into disrespect. The dinner progressed through its prescribed courses with clockwork precision. Catherine found herself developing a rhythm, learning to read the subtle cues that governed their movements. When the Queen's napkin remained in her lap, everyone continued eating. When she dabbed the corners of her mouth with delicate precision, it signaled that the course was nearing its end. She thought about her own family dinners growing up, chaotic affairs filled with laughter, interruptions, and the comfortable messiness of real conversation. Her father would often lean back in his chair, her mother would jump up mid-meal to grab something from the kitchen, and her siblings would argue good-naturedly about everything from sports to politics. The contrast with this refined silence was stark and sometimes heartbreaking. But Catherine was beginning to understand that the royal dining rituals served a purpose beyond mere etiquette. In a world where every public moment was scrutinized and analyzed, these private dinners provided a space for family unity through shared understanding. The silent signals created a bond among those who understood them, a secret language that connected them across generations. The dessert course arrived as the previous plates disappeared with the same ghostly efficiency. Individual chocolate soufflés, each one a perfect work of culinary art. Catherine had learned to appreciate the presentation as much as the taste, understanding that royal dining was as much about visual beauty as it was about nourishment. She watched William navigate the conversation with the ease of someone trained from birth. He could discuss the most mundane topics with apparent interest, ask thoughtful questions about charitable work, and maintain perfect posture throughout it all. Sometimes she marveled at how he had survived this upbringing with his sense of humor and warmth intact. The Queen began to gather her belongings, her small handbag, her reading glasses, signaling that the evening was drawing to a close. Catherine had learned that these subtle movements were as meaningful as any verbal announcement. The monarch's actions dictated the flow of every royal gathering, from the most intimate family dinner to the grandest state banquet. As they prepared to leave the dining room, Catherine reflected on how much she had learned in just 3 years. The woman who had once fumbled with protocol and worried about every gesture was slowly becoming someone who could navigate these waters with increasing confidence. The silent signals that had once seemed mysterious were beginning to feel like a second language she was finally starting to understand. The staff began their silent clearing process as the royal family filed out of the dining room. Catherine noticed how they worked with the same precision and grace that characterized everything in the palace. Every movement had purpose. Every action followed centuries of tradition. Walking beside William through the ornate corridors, Catherine felt the weight of her new role settling around her like an elaborate gown. She was no longer just Kate Middleton from Berkshire. She was Princess Catherine, a guardian of traditions that stretched back through generations of monarchs. The silent dining signals were just one small part of a vast tapestry of royal life that she was slowly learning to weave herself into. As they reached their private quarters, William finally allowed himself to relax his formal posture. "You did wonderfully tonight," he whispered, pulling her close. In the privacy of their own space, away from the watchful eyes and silent protocols, they could finally be themselves again. But Catherine knew that tomorrow would bring another formal meal, another opportunity to practice the secret language of royal dining, another step in her ongoing transformation from commoner to queen-in-waiting. The palace settled into its nighttime quiet, but Catherine lay awake thinking about the evening's lessons. Each dinner was like a masterclass in royal behavior, teaching her not just the mechanics of proper etiquette, but the deeper meanings behind every gesture. She was beginning to understand that the royal family's silent dining signals were not just about rules and restrictions. They were about maintaining dignity, showing respect for tradition, and creating unity through shared understanding of a complex and ancient code. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Windsor Castle's private dining room as Princess Catherine prepared for what would become one of the most challenging meals of her royal career. Today was different. Today, foreign dignitaries would join the family for lunch, and every gesture would carry diplomatic weight far beyond the confines of the palace walls. Catherine stood before her full-length mirror, adjusting the pearl necklace that had belonged to Princess Diana. William had given it to her on their first wedding anniversary, explaining that his mother would have wanted her to wear it during important occasions. The weight of the pearls against her throat felt heavier today, as if they carried the expectations of generations of royal women who had navigated these treacherous social waters before her. Lady Margaret, her lady-in-waiting, bustled around the room, making final preparations. "Remember, your Royal Highness," she said in her crisp accent. "The ambassador's wife speaks very little English. Watch for her cues about when to begin each course. If she seems confused by any of our customs, a gentle smile and a small nod toward the appropriate utensil will guide her without causing embarrassment." Catherine nodded, understanding the delicate balance required. Royal dining etiquette was not just about following rules. It was about making others feel comfortable while maintaining the dignity of the crown. The silent signals that had once seemed like obstacles were now tools she could use to help others navigate this complex world. The Chinese delegation had arrived the previous evening for a week-long state visit. Their presence would transform every meal from a family gathering into a carefully choreographed diplomatic performance. Catherine had spent hours studying briefing documents about Chinese dining customs, looking for ways to bridge the gap between two very different cultural traditions. As she made her way to the dining room, Catherine passed portraits of queens who had faced similar challenges. Queen Victoria, who had hosted dignitaries from across the British Empire. Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, who had maintained royal traditions through 2 world wars. Each woman had found ways to adapt the ancient protocols to serve the needs of their time. The dining room had been transformed for the occasion. The usual intimate setting had been expanded to accommodate 12 guests. Additional staff members stood at attention, their presence both more formal and more numerous than usual. Catherine noticed how even the flower arrangements had been carefully chosen, chrysanthemums and peonies, flowers that held special significance in Chinese culture. Ambassador Chun and his wife entered the room with the careful precision of people who understood the importance of the occasion. Mrs. Chun wore a beautiful silk dress in deep emerald green, her movements graceful but tentative. Catherine recognized the look. It was the same expression she had worn during her first formal royal dinner, a mixture of determination and barely concealed nervousness. The queen entered with her customary dignity, but Catherine noticed subtle adjustments in her usual routine. Her movements were slightly slower, her pauses longer, accommodating guests who might need extra time to interpret the silent signals that came so naturally to the royal family. It was a masterclass in diplomatic consideration disguised as royal etiquette. Prince Philip took his usual seat, but Catherine observed how he made small modifications to his normal behavior. His napkin placement was more deliberate, his gesture toward his water glass more pronounced. These tiny adjustments were invisible to most observers, but created a more accessible version of royal dining etiquette for their international guests. William squeezed Catherine's hand briefly as they took their seats, a moment of connection before they assumed their public roles. She had learned to treasure these small gestures of support, understanding that they would sustain her through the complex performance that formal dining had become. The first course arrived with even greater ceremony than usual. The palace staff had clearly been briefed on the importance of this meal. Every movement was precise, every service flawless. Catherine watched Mrs. Chun from the corner of her eye, ready to provide subtle guidance if needed. She noticed that Mrs. Chun was watching the queen intently, trying to decode the same silent signals that Catherine had struggled with years earlier. When the queen lifted her soup spoon, Mrs. Chun followed. When the queen paused between spoonfuls, Mrs. Chun mirrored the rhythm. Catherine felt a surge of empathy, remembering her own desperate attempts to follow royal protocol without appearing obvious about it. The conversation flowed in careful diplomatic channels. The Queen spoke about the beautiful weather and inquired politely about the ambassador's journey. Prince Charles discussed the magnificent gardens they had toured that morning. Every topic was safe, neutral, and designed to put their guests at ease while maintaining appropriate formality. Catherine found herself serving as a bridge between the formal royal protocols and the natural human need for connection. When Mrs. Chen seemed confused about which fork to use for the fish course, Catherine simply picked up the correct utensil with a warm smile, demonstrating without drawing attention to the moment. It was a skill she had developed over years of navigating these situations herself. Prince Harry, now in his early 20s and more seasoned in royal protocol, provided moments of gentle humor that helped ease the tension without violating diplomatic propriety. His timing was perfect, his jokes culturally sensitive, and his ability to read the room had improved dramatically since his teenage years. The main course presented new challenges. The traditional British roast beef required different cutting techniques than Chinese guests might be accustomed to. Catherine watched as Ambassador Chen observed Prince Philip's methodical approach, then quietly adapted his own technique to match. The silent learning process was fascinating to observe. Mrs. Chen began to relax as the meal progressed, her movements becoming more natural as she gained confidence in reading the royal dining signals. Catherine remembered that same gradual relaxation from her own early experiences. The transformation from anxiety to comfort was always beautiful to witness. The Queen made subtle adjustments throughout the meal that showed her decades of experience in international diplomacy. When she sensed that Mrs. Chen was struggling with the heavy crystal water glass, she switched to smaller, more frequent sips, making it easier for her guest to follow. When the ambassador seemed uncertain about the pace of eating, she slowed her own rhythm slightly. Catherine marveled at how the silent dining signals could be adapted without losing their essential meaning. The basic framework remained the same: respect for the monarch's pace, proper utensil usage, appropriate conversation topics. But the execution could be modified to accommodate different cultural backgrounds and comfort levels. The diplomatic staff who observed from the sidelines took careful notes, understanding that successful state visits often hinged on these intimate moments as much as formal negotiations. The way guests were made to feel welcome at the royal table could influence international relationships for years to come. As the dessert course appeared, Catherine reflected on how much she had grown in her understanding of royal dining etiquette. What had once seemed like a rigid set of incomprehensible rules now revealed itself as a flexible system designed to create comfort and unity among diverse groups of people. Mrs. Chen had begun to anticipate some of the signals, lifting her coffee cup only after the Queen had touched hers, waiting for the subtle nod that indicated it was appropriate to begin the next course. The learning process was accelerating, and Catherine could see the pride in the older woman's eyes as she successfully navigated each challenge. The conversation turned to shared experiences, travel, family, cultural traditions. Within the safe boundaries of royal protocol, genuine connections were beginning to form. Catherine contributed stories of her own cultural adjustments, carefully edited to be appropriate for the setting, but genuine enough to create real rapport. Ambassador Chen spoke eloquently about his appreciation for British traditions, while the Queen expressed sincere interest in Chinese customs. The exchange was formal but warm, creating the foundation for continued diplomatic friendship. These personal connections, forged over carefully orchestrated meals, often proved more valuable than any treaty or formal agreement. As the lunch drew to a close, Catherine observed the delicate process of ending a diplomatic meal. The Queen's movements became slightly more purposeful, her glances toward her staff more deliberate. These signals, invisible to the untrained eye, initiated the careful choreography of departure. Mrs. Chen rose with grace when the Queen stood, her confidence now evident in every movement. The transformation from nervous guest to comfortable participant had been complete. Catherine felt proud to have played a small role in that success, understanding that her own journey through royal etiquette had equipped her to help others navigate the same challenges. The diplomatic success of the meal would be measured not just in the comfort of their guests, but in the strengthening of international relationships. The silent dining signals that governed royal meals had served their deeper purpose, creating an environment where trust could develop and understanding could flourish. Walking with William through the palace corridors after their guests had departed, Catherine reflected on the profound responsibility that came with her role. Every meal was an opportunity to represent not just her family, but her country. The silent signals she had learned were tools of diplomacy as much as markers of social class. That evening, as she prepared for bed, Catherine thought about Mrs. Chun and the courage it had taken for her to participate in such a formal cultural exchange. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to use the language of royal dining etiquette in service of larger goals. She was beginning to understand that mastering these silent signals was not an end in itself, but a means to something much more important: the ability to make others feel valued, respected, and welcome in even the most formal circumstances. The private dining room at Sandringham House felt different during the Christmas holidays. 5 years had passed since Catherine's first nervous dinner with the royal family, and now she sat at the familiar table with the confidence of someone who had not only mastered the silent dining signals, but had begun to understand their deeper emotional significance. Tonight, however, would test everything she had learned in ways she never anticipated. Prince George, now 4 years old, sat in a specially designed chair between William and Catherine. His bright eyes took in every detail of the formal dinner setting with the curiosity of a child who was beginning to understand that his family was unlike others. Princess Charlotte, barely 2, remained in the nursery with her nanny, but George had reached the age where he needed to begin learning the traditions that would shape his entire life. Catherine watched her son's small hands as he tried to imitate his father's proper grip on the child-sized fork. The sight filled her with a complex mixture of pride and sadness. George would never know the freedom of casual family dinners, the luxury of eating with his elbows on the table or talking with his mouth full. Every meal would be a lesson in restraint, control, and the weight of royal expectations. The Queen, now in her 90s but still presiding over family dinners with unwavering dignity, had softened slightly in her approach to her great-grandchildren. Catherine noticed how she made subtle accommodations for George's presence, speaking slightly louder, pausing longer between courses, and occasionally offering gentle corrections disguised as observations about proper behavior. "George, watch how Gongon holds her spoon," William murmured softly, using the informal name the children had adopted for their great-grandmother. The little prince adjusted his grip, his face serious with concentration. Catherine's heart ached watching him work so hard to meet standards that most 4-year-olds never had to consider. The evening's guest list included several family members who rarely attended these intimate dinners. Peter Phillips and Zara Tyndall, Princess and children, had joined them with their own young families. Catherine observed how the royal cousins navigated the delicate balance between family warmth and formal protocol, creating an atmosphere that was both comfortable for the children and appropriately dignified for the setting. Young Savannah Phillips, Peter's daughter, sat across from George with the easy confidence of a child who had been attending royal dinners since birth. Catherine watched the interaction between the cousins, noting how Savannah's natural adherence to proper behavior served as a model for George. The children were learning from each other, passing down traditions through observation and imitation rather than formal instruction. The conversation tonight centered around family memories and upcoming engagements, but Catherine detected an undercurrent of concern about the Queen's health. The matriarch's movements were slightly slower, her pauses between words a bit longer. The silent dining signals that she had mastered over 7 decades of royal life remained precise, but they required more effort than in previous years. Prince Charles seemed particularly attentive to his mother's needs, anticipating her requirements before she expressed them. When she reached for her water glass, he was already gesturing for staff assistance. When she paused in her eating, he naturally slowed his own pace. Catherine recognized these behaviors as another form of silent communication, the language of care disguised as royal protocol. Princess and maintained her usual direct approach to family dinners, but Catherine noticed how she guided her grandchildren with gentle firmness. When young Isla Phillips began to fidget and simply caught her eye and demonstrated the proper sitting posture without saying a word. The correction was subtle but effective, teaching important lessons while maintaining the dignity of the occasion. William had evolved into his role as future king with a grace that sometimes surprised Catherine. She watched him navigate between being a father, a son, a grandson, and a future monarch, adjusting his behavior subtly for each relationship while maintaining perfect adherence to royal dining protocol. His ability to balance these multiple roles was becoming second nature. The arrival of the main course coincided with George's first serious challenge of the evening. The roasted pheasant required careful cutting and precise handling, skills that were beyond his small motor abilities. Catherine felt the familiar tension of wanting to help her child while knowing that royal children were expected to develop independence and proper technique through practice rather than assistance. The Queen caught Catherine's eye across the table and offered the slightest nod toward George's plate. It was permission to provide discreet guidance, recognition that teaching proper dining skills was more important than strict adherence to the principle of self-sufficiency. Catherine leaned slightly toward her son, quietly demonstrating the correct cutting technique. "Small pieces, darling," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Just like Papa showed you." George nodded solemnly, working carefully to follow her guidance. The moment was tender but also profound. Catherine was passing down not just practical skills, but the cultural DNA of his royal heritage. Zara Tyndall's children provided an interesting contrast to the direct royal line. Their behavior was impeccable, but slightly more relaxed, reflecting their position as beloved family members who would never bear the full weight of royal expectations. Catherine observed how this subtle difference affected their interaction with formal dining protocols, respectful, but not burdened by the same level of scrutiny. The conversation turned to upcoming charitable events and official duties, but the presence of the children added a layer of complexity to these discussions. How much should young royal children understand about their future responsibilities? When should the weight of duty begin to settle on their small shoulders? Catherine grappled with these questions every day as a mother. Prince Harry, now married and starting to build his own life, brought a different energy to the family dinner. His relationship with royal protocol had always been complicated, and Catherine watched how he balanced respect for tradition with his natural inclination toward informality. His interactions with the children were particularly telling, warm and playful, but never crossing the lines of appropriate behavior. The dessert course brought unexpected drama when George accidentally knocked over his small crystal glass of water. The sound of crystal hitting china seemed to echo through the formal dining room like a gunshot. Catherine's instinct was to immediately comfort her son and clean up the mess, but royal protocol demanded a more measured response. The Queen's reaction was masterful. She simply continued her conversation as if nothing had happened while staff members silently appeared to address the situation. Her refusal to acknowledge the accident as anything more than a minor incident taught everyone at the table, especially the children, that grace under pressure was more important than perfection in execution. George's face had flushed red with embarrassment, but William's quiet reassurance helped him regain his composure. "Accidents happen to everyone," he murmured softly, his voice carrying the weight of personal experience. Catherine knew that William was remembering his own childhood mistakes at royal dinners, the learning process that every royal child had to navigate. The evening's most poignant moment came when the Queen began to share memories of Christmas dinners from decades past. Her stories about Prince Philip's struggles with formal protocol during his early years as a royal spouse resonated deeply with Catherine. The Duke of Edinburgh had faced many of the same challenges she had encountered, learning to navigate the complex world of royal dining etiquette as an outsider marrying into the family. Philip knocked over an entire candelabra during our first Christmas dinner as a married couple. The Queen shared with a rare smile. He was so mortified that he didn't speak for the rest of the meal. The story humanized the intimidating Duke and reminded everyone that mastering royal protocol was a process that required patience and practice. Catherine looked around the table at this extraordinary family she had joined through love and commitment. Each person represented a different relationship with the traditions they were upholding. The Queen embodied the institutional knowledge of decades. Prince Charles carried the weight of future responsibility. Princess and represented unwavering dedication to duty. William balanced multiple roles with increasing skill, and the children represented hope for the future continuity of these ancient traditions. As the evening drew to a close, Catherine reflected on how the silent dining signals had become second nature to her. The careful placement of utensils, the timing of conversation, the subtle cues that guided every interaction. These are no longer obstacles to overcome, but tools that helped create order, dignity, and unity within the family. George had made it through his first formal Christmas dinner with the main royal family, a milestone that would be remembered and referenced in years to come. His small successes and minor mistakes would become part of the family lore, stories to share with his own children someday when they face the same challenges. Walking through the corridors of Sandringham House after dinner, Catherine carried George, who had fallen asleep despite his efforts to stay awake for the entire evening. The weight of his small body reminded her of the weight of responsibility they were all carrying, the preservation of traditions that stretch back centuries while adapting them for a modern world. The silent dining signals that had once seemed mysterious and intimidating now felt like an inheritance she was proud to pass down to her children. They represented more than just rules and restrictions. They embodied values of respect, consideration, dignity, and the importance of putting duty above personal comfort. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to practice these lessons, and Catherine felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. 10 years had transformed Princess Catherine from an uncertain newcomer into a confident guardian of royal tradition. As she sat in the same dining room where she had once struggled to understand the most basic protocols, she now found herself in the unprecedented position of teaching these sacred traditions to others while simultaneously questioning their relevance in a rapidly changing world. The morning had brought devastating news. The Queen, after 7 decades of unwavering service, had passed away peacefully in her sleep. The entire nation was in mourning, but the immediate royal family faced the additional challenge of navigating their grief while maintaining the stability that the monarchy represented. Today's lunch would be their first meal together as a family without the steadying presence of their beloved matriarch. King Charles III sat at the head of the table for the first time, a position he had been preparing for his entire life but had hoped to assume under different circumstances. Catherine watched as he struggled with the weight of his new role, his movements careful and deliberate as he unconsciously adopted the formal precision that his mother had embodied for so many years. William, now the Prince of Wales and heir to the throne, sat to his father's right. The change in his demeanor was subtle but significant. The easy confidence that had characterized his approach to royal duties had been replaced by a more serious awareness of his proximity to ultimate responsibility. Catherine knew that this transformation would affect every aspect of their lives, including the intimate family moments that dining together represented. Princess Anne maintained her usual composure, but Catherine caught glimpses of deep sadness in her eyes. She had been closest to their mother and was struggling more than the others to maintain the emotional distance that royal protocol demanded. The silent dining signals that had once facilitated family unity now seemed to create barriers to the natural expression of grief. Prince George, now 14, sat with the straight-back posture of a young man who understood the gravity of the moment. His formal education in royal protocol had intensified over the past several years, and he moved through the dining rituals with an ease that sometimes startled Catherine. She wondered if his natural comfort with these traditions was a blessing or a loss of the innocent spontaneity that childhood should provide. Princess Charlotte, now 12, brought a different energy to the formal setting. Her adherence to proper protocol was flawless, but she maintained a warmth and accessibility that reminded Catherine of herself at that age. Watching Charlotte navigate between royal expectations and natural sisterly affection for her younger brother Louis provided insights into how the next generation might adapt these ancient traditions. Prince Louis, at 10 years old, represented the future of the monarchy in ways that both excited and terrified Catherine. His natural charisma and easy charm suggested that he might become the family member who could most effectively bridge the gap between royal tradition and popular accessibility. His approach to formal dining reflected this potential, respectful of protocol, but never rigid or artificial. The meal proceeded with subdued conversation, each family member processing their grief while maintaining the dignified behavior that public expectations demanded. Catherine found herself serving as an emotional anchor for the children, providing subtle reassurance through glances, gentle nods, and the occasional discreet touch of encouragement. The absence of the Queen's guiding presence was felt in countless small ways. The pace of the meal seemed uncertain without her subtle signals about when to begin and end each course. The staff, who had served her for decades, moved with less assurance, frequently checking with King Charles for cues that had once come naturally from their longtime monarch. Catherine reflected on the evolution of her own relationship with royal dining protocol over the past decade. What had begun as a source of anxiety had become a framework for family unity and personal growth. The silent signals that had once seemed arbitrary now revealed their deeper purpose. They provided stability and continuity during times of tremendous change. The conversation inevitably turned to funeral arrangements and the complex logistics of a state ceremony that would be watched by billions of people worldwide. Catherine listened as her family discussed these details with the same careful attention to protocol that governed their dining behavior. Every decision would be scrutinized, every choice would carry symbolic weight. King Charles spoke about his mother's final wishes regarding family traditions and public ceremonies. She had been very specific about maintaining the dignity of royal customs while allowing for appropriate modernization. Her guidance would influence royal behavior for generations to come, including the intimate family dining rituals that had shaped Catherine's own transformation. William shared memories of lessons his grandmother had taught him about leadership and responsibility. Many of these conversations had taken place during formal dinners, when the quiet setting allowed for serious discussions about duty and service. The dining room had served as an informal classroom where royal children learned about their future roles through observation and gentle instruction. Princess and contributed practical considerations about managing public expectations while dealing with personal grief. Her years of experience had taught her that the royal family's private moments of sorrow had to be balanced against their public responsibility to provide stability and continuity. Even their family meals would be analyzed for signs of division or weakness. The children listened with the serious attention of young people who were beginning to understand the weight of their inheritance. They had grown up with the knowledge that their lives would be different from those of their peers, but the Queen's death made those differences more immediate and concrete. Their dining behavior reflected this new awareness, more formal than in previous years, but still authentically their own personalities. Catherine observed how each family member was adapting to their new roles within the changed hierarchy. King Charles was growing into his authority with visible effort. William was accepting his position as direct heir with quiet determination. The children were maturing into their responsibilities with impressive grace. She felt proud of how the family was navigating this transition while maintaining the values that had been instilled through decades of shared meals and quiet instruction. The staff who had served the royal family for years were also adjusting to the change in leadership. Their movements around the dining table reflected the same uncertainty that the family was experiencing. The smooth choreography that had characterized royal meals for decades would need time to re-establish itself under new leadership. As the meal progressed, Catherine began to see glimpses of how the family would adapt to their new circumstances. King Charles was finding his rhythm as the leader of family gatherings. William was stepping naturally into his role as the future king. The children were growing into their positions with dignity and authenticity. The traditions that had seemed so rigid when she first encountered them were proving to be remarkably flexible. The afternoon brought additional family members for what would be their first major gathering since the Queen's death. Cousins, nephews, nieces, and their various spouses filled the expanded dining room, creating a complex web of relationships and protocols that Catherine now navigated with confidence. Her role as a senior royal woman was firmly established, and she found herself guiding newer family members through the same challenges she had once faced. Watching the extended family interact during this emotionally charged meal, Catherine was struck by the healing power of shared traditions. The familiar rhythms of formal dining provided comfort during a time of profound loss. The silent signals that governed their behavior created a sense of unity and purpose that transcended individual grief. The younger generation of royal cousins looked to Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis for cues about appropriate behavior. Catherine realized that her children were now the standard-bearers for royal dining etiquette among their peers, a responsibility they were handling with remarkable maturity and grace. As the day drew to a close, the family gathered for a final informal meal together before beginning the intensive preparations for the state funeral. The atmosphere was more relaxed than the formal lunch, but the underlying protocols remained unchanged. Catherine marveled at how these dining traditions provided structure and comfort during the most challenging moments of royal life. King Charles rose from his chair with the measured dignity that would characterize his reign, and the family followed his lead with natural deference. The transition of authority had been seamless, a testament to the power of traditions that had been passed down through generations of royal meals and quiet instruction. Walking through the palace corridors with her family, Catherine reflected on the profound journey she had taken over the past decade. The nervous young woman who had once struggled with the basics of royal dining etiquette had evolved into a confident guardian of these traditions, someone who could adapt them for modern circumstances while preserving their essential meaning and purpose. The future would bring new challenges and opportunities to modernize royal traditions while maintaining their core values. Catherine felt ready for this responsibility, understanding that the silent dining signals she had mastered were not relics of the past, but tools for building unity, teaching important values, and creating stability in an uncertain world. The traditions would continue, adapted for each new generation, but fundamentally unchanged in their purpose and power to bring families together in service of something larger than themselves. Tomorrow would begin a new chapter in the history of the British royal family, and Catherine knew that the lessons learned around countless dining tables would guide them through whatever challenges lay ahead. The silent signals that had once seemed mysterious now felt like a precious inheritance, one that she was honored to preserve and pass on to future generations.